First, I would like to express my appreciation to the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, for inviting the European Union to observe these important elections. And I'd also like to express my gratitude to federal and state institutions, judiciary, civil society, media, and of course political participants for their continuous cooperation during the course of our observation mission. The mission started its work on the 11th of January and observed all stages of the electoral processes up to date. Our observers are still at state collation offices following the results process as we speak. For the 18th March elections, the mission deployed almost 70 international observers in 20 states across Nigeria. The mission was comprised of observers from 25 EU member states and from our colleagues in Norway and Switzerland. In this regard, I would like to thank the delegation of the European Union. In Nigeria, the embassies of the EU member states who are represented here today, and the embassies of Norway and Switzerland, who enforced our mission with locally recruited short-term observers. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the mission we saw that Nigerians have a great appetite for democracy and are keen to engage in various civic activities. However, in large parts of the country, their expectations were not met. Further, many Nigerians were so disappointed with the electoral process of the 25th of February that on Saturday they decided to stay at home. The voter apathy that we witnessed is, in part, a clear consequence of failures by political elites and unfortunately also by INEC. We all remember how public confidence and trust in INEC collapsed on the 25th of February, primarily due to lack of transparency and operational failures in the conduct of the federal level polls. Up until the postponement of the state elections, INEC limited its communication to a few press releases and ceremonial statements. These were insufficient to address public grievances and rebuild public confidence. Positively, however, from the 11th of March onwards, INEC introduced various corrective measures, and on Saturday we saw that some of those steps had taken effect. For example, sensitive materials were delivered on time, and the use of election technologies was improved. Nevertheless, polling on election day was again disrupted by multiple incidents of thuggery, intimidation of voters, polling officials, observers and journalists, and this occurred in most of the states. Lagos and Kano, as well as other states across the southern and central areas, were most affected. Unfortunately, there were also many casualties and indeed fatalities. This is worrying, as the killing of even one citizen during the conduct of an election is one too many. Our observers noted that most polling units opened on time, with materials present and election officials ready to serve the voter. However, there was less pressure on INEC operations throughout the day, owing to a dismal level of voter participation. Vote buying, also directly observed by EU EOM observers, further detracted from an appropriate conduct of the election in many places. The use of election technology was more efficient this time around. By midday yesterday, gubernatorial race results forms available online range from 62 to 97%, depending on the state. A notable change if compared with the 25th of February election, when more than a quarter of presidential result forms were still missing at the declaration of the results on the 1st of March. Some 11,000 candidates competed in the state elections, among whom only a bare 10% were women. Notably, lead political parties fielded only 2 female candidates for highly prized governor seats. It demonstrates a clear underrepresentation of women in political life. Most importantly, it also shows the lack of internal party policies to support and promote inclusion of women. And let me also remind you that it is almost 40 years since Nigeria signed up to the United Nations Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and in so doing committed to eradicate discrimination against women in political life. Before I share our assessment of the campaign environment, let me stress that intra-party conflicts compounded by protracted deadlines for candidacy disputes created wholesale uncertainty for voters and electoral contestants alike. We observed that some court decisions about the electoral contestants were taken only a few days before the poll. Such timelines effectively reduce candidates' prospects to meaningfully campaign. Overall, campaigns in the state elections were highly competitive. Fundamental freedoms of assembly and movement were largely respected. However, the latter was impeded in some states by insecurity and executive actions. Further, organized violent attacks shortly before the polls led to a fearful atmosphere in some parts of the country. The campaign also saw many defections and individual switching supports from one party to another. Our observers noted that in several states, the abuse of incumbency gave an undue advantage to the party in power and limited the free expression of the will of the voter. Positively, voters in 15 out of 28 states benefited from professionally organized media debates, during which journalists questioned lead gubernatorial candidates on issues of local concern, while fact-checkers probed their responses for accuracy. It helped voters to make a better informed choice on election day, even if most incumbents rebuffed media offers. Unfortunately, attacks and harassment of journalists that occurred on the 25th of February went unprosecuted. I would hope that those who assault journalists, as well as those who perpetrated such attacks during this Saturday's polls, will be brought to justice. Our social media monitoring showed that gubernatorial candidates' online communication was focused on issues, a positive change from the presidential contest. However, disinformation contaminated online information space and aimed to confuse voters. We also recorded some dangerous rhetoric seeking to sow ethnic division. Positively, fact-checking initiatives continue to debunk such content and strive to preserve the integrity of the online space. Last but not least, I would like to commend the efforts of civil society organizations. Between the elections, national observer groups raised awareness and provided important electoral information to voters. Their leadership actively participated in online and offline discussions, calling for greater transparency and accountability of INEC ahead of the state elections. As I mentioned earlier, the collation process is still ongoing, and the EU Election Observation Mission is continuing its observation of this crucial phase of the election. Therefore, I encourage stakeholders to keep committed to a peaceful process and address any grievances through the courts. In this regard, I am mindful of the fact that various aspects of the presidential election have already been brought before the courts. I understand that petitions may also be submitted regarding several Senate and House of Representatives elections. That being said, it is important that this mission maintains its strict line of impartiality and non-interference in accordance with our observation methodology. Accordingly, I do not propose to discuss matters related to those elections, as they are now likely to be sub judice. This is to avoid saying anything that might be construed as to prejudice the interests of any party in those petitions. As observers, we always hope to see a frictionless electoral process, to see democracy striving. Unfortunately, wide expectations that the new electoral law, in particular, would notably improve the overall conduct of the polls were not met, due in part to the poor implementation of the law and lack of political will to achieve its objectives. The conduct of the 2023 elections revealed systemic weaknesses of election administration that, if not properly and comprehensively addressed, could lead to democratic backsliding. This can have costly consequences or any country on any continent. Considering the pivotal role Nigeria has for this region, for Africa and the world, this is particularly important at this time. I thank you very much for your attention.